everyone. Yeah, I know I'm going to start to sound like a broken record, but hey, apparently you got to do that nowadays, right? Just, hey, the liberals get it. You got to repeat things over and 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 over. Apparently you really, really, well, why would that be the case? Why would you have to constantly repeat things over and over? Because people have been indoctrinated in a particular faith or a particular ideology, and if you want to break them out of that, well, you gotta do the exact same thing, but in reverse or in a different direction. That's a strange world that we live in today, that people are so indoctrinated into the religion of the state that the only thing you can do today, or I should say in a particular ideology, because that's the thing, the state is the overarching authority, or that pretense of authority, but yeah, there's lots of iteration of that. So communism, socialism, fascism, democracy, right? Republicanism. There's so many different ways that you can promote authoritarianism in any way. But now today it's like, shouldn't we be, now that we live in the 21st century and we live in the information age, shouldn't we be trying to get a little bit further past being indentured serfs, subjects or slaves to a ruling class? Weren't we supposed to break out of that basically in the 17th and 18th century? Wasn't there, well, if you look through the past, if you look through the history as far as literature, documentaries, books, novels, I mean, there's so many areas, we should have been able to break through that, break free of that indoctrinated mindset of conformity, of subjugation. Wow, the authoritarians are so powerful. They still got large percentages and portions of the population in all of Western society that still falls for that kind of rhetoric, for that kind of nonsense. And it's all based on the pretense that they're going to be able to take care of you from cradle to grave. Most of the time, that's how it's done. Like I say, the communists, the fascists, the socialists, just give me all the power, right? Or even if you're talking about the mafia, it always comes down to the same thing, that people want to be your authority. They want to rule you. They always want you to give up your sovereignty, your individuality, your self-esteem, your self-respect, and just place everything in their hands. And don't worry, they'll take care of you, right? And I mean, how many times has that actually worked out? Never! You can't point to one example through all of human history where the people, where the masses gave up their sovereignty, their individual rights, freedoms, and liberties, where that actually worked out beneficial for them. It's never happened, and it's never going to happen going forward. And why we live in this 21st century, the age of information, where there's still a large portion of the population of this world that still believes in that nonsense. Why that still exists is because, well, I'll tell you why. Because they keep repeating their same rhetoric over and over again to indoctrinate with you. And of course, they start that out real early, from about the time you're 4 or 5 years old, so it really gets emboldened in your mind, or engraved. That ultimately is the key for their power, for their ability to maintain their pretense of power over you, is by sheer fact that they start that process very early. So that, like I say, it's literally engraved into your brain. So even when you become adult, you still feel like you have to subject yourself or subjugate yourself to them. You might want to try to work through that and learn to be an adult someday. If you, your parents or your grandparents have done that over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 decades or so, we wouldn't be in the position that this article is pointing out today. Headline out of the Globe and Mail: average Canadian household spent more on taxes than living costs in 2018, report finds. This being reported by Tim Schufelt, investment reporter, August 1st, 2019. So like I said, I don't want to sound like a complete broken record, but I've said this many times in the past. Even slaves, even all you people that say, ooh, slavery was bad. And I agree 100%. Slavery was terrible, but it didn't actually go away. Your thought leaders, your opinion makers, and your rulers, they just figured out a new way to come up with a whole new sales pitch to keep you compliant, conformist, and still a modern day slave. But they tricked your mind into thinking that you're free in some way, when in reality you can't be. And even the headline of this article, the facts or statistics contained within it, points that out with should be genuine clarity. But once again, put these issues critically, used even when it's been laid out to you by today. The average Canadian household paid nearly $40,000 in taxes last year, more than the combined cost of clothing, food, and shelter, according to a new report. So think about it. Like I said another time, like I said, unfortunately though, hey, they repeat the constant nonsense to keep you indoctrinated, well, I guess I got to repeat objective clarity and logical and consistent thinking to try to break you free from that indoctrination. I got to work just as hard as they do. The problem is they got government to pay for them. They got that forced wealth and income redistributed model, or cronyism or fascism, as a means to supplement their incomes. Whereas I got to function in the free market. But you know what? If you want to be a free person, well, you really should help those of us who are promoting freedom. Because if the central planners and the authoritarians have all the economic benefits and we got none, they're going to win and we're going to lose. Which means you're going to lose. The Fraser Institute's annual Canadian Consumer Tax Index is meant to show how the tax bill has changed over time. Last year's average tax burden of $39,299 is almost 3 times what Canadians paid in 1961, after adjusting for inflation, and has risen much faster than the cost of necessities, including housing, the Institute said. The authors calculated that the typical household spent just more than $32,000 on clothing, food, and shelter in 2018. So think about it. Housing, food, and clothing. Everything that you need basically to sustain yourself so that you can live, so that you can exist, costs less by a fairly substantial degree. $32,000 in comparison and contrast to $40,000. So a whole $8,000 more that the government steals from you. And have you really consumed $40,000 worth of services from the government over the course of a year? Think about that. You as the individual Canadian, just sit down someday and ask yourself, did $40,000, that number that represents how much the government took from your average Canadian income, did that actually go towards something that you felt that you actually benefit from? Or even your kids, even your family, do you think all of you combined, let's say you, your wife, and your couple kids, or in Canada predominantly one kid these days, but even with 2 parents and 1 kid, although we actually don't even have that. You have 1 parent and 1 kid, or 1 parent. But even with that, no matter what scenario you figure out, like I say, 1 parent, 5 kids, 2 parents, 2 kids, did you really consume $40,000 worth of government services, which, once again, you paid for all that. Government's not providing anything for you, but did you really consume $40,000 worth of that in the course of a year? No, you didn't. I mean, there might be a small, tiny portion of the population did, but once again, these are the people that are taking advantage of these socialist schemes. Whereas if you're a responsible, I know myself, I haven't used any. Well, in the last year, no healthcare services, no like welfare, no. The most I've ever used is unemployment. I've used unemployment, but that's on top of all the taxes. That's not even counted into any tax equation or formula, because that's an added tax. That's an added service that's outside of our taxes. When you get your paycheck, you see that there's not just the CPP, but the EI. That's separate from the taxes you pay. So that's an extra tax that you pay for that quasi safety net. But how many of us even get more out of it than we pay? Like I say, over the course of your lifetime, even with unemployment insurance alone, you've probably paid way more in than you'll ever get out. These are Ponzi scheme, folks. Like, come on, can we just stop denying the fact that we live in the world of constant Ponzi schemes put forth and presented to you by your central planning overlords, and all they have to do is come up with a narrative or some kind of advertising tactic or sales tactic to manipulate you enough so that you believe that you're going to benefit somehow. Like I say, most Canadians are not coming close to receiving that $40,000 that the government's taken away from you, plundering your income. Think about what you could do with that extra $40,000 in your household. Or actually, not just even your household. Think about if you could actually use that $40,000 to help people that you genuinely wanted to help. But you can't. Why? Because the government takes that from you against your will, by use of political edict, by way of government, which is the representation of monopoly, force, or violence, and they just spend it however they want to. And most of the time, tell you the truth, they're using that to cause even more harm to you, or to pay for their mindless enforcers, or the legal or media class in this country that, once again, just sit around all day, every day, figuring out ways to better socially or economically enslave you, or to make you into a modern day subject to the ruling class. Because that's what they're using most of that benefit. Like, think about the media, think about the CBC. That's just one example of a Canadian crown corporation that actually takes like $1 billion+ from the Canadian taxpayer, from the Canadian worker, so that they can propagandize them and keep them indoctrinated in their belief in statism. so they can keep that paycheck coming, not just to these media mouthpieces, but their political ruling class cohorts who are part and parcel of not just the politics or the political class, but the corporate class in this country. Like I say, they're all, that's a big old group, but you're not part of it. And they're all making out like bandits at your expense. And for some reason, Canadians haven't wised up to that fact and seemingly aren't willing to actually adopt real change in this country. Because if you were, well, I'd see a whole lot more of you out there supporting the PBC or Maxime Bernier. Because really, out there on that political landscape, where there's any viable option for us to send a very clear message to the ruling establishment or the status quo or their media mouthpieces, we could send that message to them. But once again, apparently a lot of Canadians are either too dumbed down, too indoctrinated, too busy having to work to put food on the table, which once again, the government loves you for doing that because they're getting like a large, substantial portion of that. So yeah, keep being a good little slave, keep being a good little subject, keep being a good little serf. Your authoritarian rulers, they love you for doing it. Keep doing that because you're keeping them greatly rewarded. Hey, they might actually go out and buy themselves another new house to bid up the speculative value in another city that puts that way out of the range of the younger generations who aren't part and parcel of the ruling class. They might continue to take full advantage of the fact that Canadians are more than willing to go along to get along and maintain this massively corrupt system. I don't know, like I said, I don't know why Canadians continue to show and prove time and time again why they're willing to allow this to continue. Do you have no self-respect, no self-esteem? Do you not care for your future successive generations in any way? To me, it's really, really, really weird. I find it odd to know that there's still a substantial portion of people in 2019, in the 21st century, that allow this kind of stuff to happen, that still want to live as basically modern-day slaves to a ruling class. Like I say, folks, someday you might want to get that backbone checked out. You know, maybe gain a little self-esteem, maybe gain a little self-respect. And if you don't want to do it for yourself, well, at least do it for the rest of us that don't want to be enslaved anymore. I'm a slave because the majority of my peers don't want to ever allow me to have any freedoms. That is the truth of the matter, folks, and that is what democracy represents, is the majority of the mob is saying, for those who are representing the minority or those who promote individual rights, freedom, and liberty, they're saying, nah, we're not going to afford you that. You're not allowed to be free. I deem you my serf, my subject, my slave, and I want to have the claim over a larger portion of your productive income or your productive capacity. And I'll support any party that's willing to keep it going. That's what they're telling you, folks. And if you keep allowing them to do it, well, as far as I'm concerned, you deserve everything you get. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.